I don't know if you guys have
Okay.
seen, but the Mark Carney gaffe where he said that he was helped advise Paul Martin to balance the budget back in the day, and people kind of caught him out on that. It's turned into an entire political meme extravaganza all over X. There's AI generated images of Mark Carney taking claim for massive historical events. Mark Carney invented the wheel. He discovered insulin. Mark Carney advised Winston Churchill in the Battle of Britain. It's pretty great. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but I would recommend people check it out because it's always wonderful when political serious matters kind of burst out into these creative arrays of memes and meme energy.
Yeah, sometimes we take politics a little too seriously, but one of my favorites is Mark Carney was looking for Epstein Island in 1492, but discovered North America. And pretty timely, with
There's
everything
this
in the
funny
news
one
right
here.
now.
I saw it's in 2007. Mark Carney presented his new invention to the entire world, the iPhone, and he's dressed just like Steve Jobs. He's like presenting the iPhone. It's like, I mean, you could go through. You just type Mark Carney on X, and there's probably thousands of these images, and each one funnier than the last. I've been scrolling through them here, just laughing because they are so funny.
And it's such a good break to the, I guess, seriousness of this election. And it's always great to see this happen because, on the one hand, they're so over the top, it's hard to get mad at them, right? So if Mark Carney were to actually get mad and take this too seriously, it's like, well, clearly it's just so ridiculous and hilarious. But let's get right into it. We have a couple stories to talk about today. Okay, so right off the bat, we had the Ontario election last night, which saw Ontario Premier, the newly re-elected Premier Doug Ford, win a third consecutive majority government in Ontario. Now, if I recall correctly, this is the first time that has happened in Ontario's political history, right, Noah?
Yep, I have a poster on my wall of all the premiers in Ontario, and from about 1940 to 1980, Ontario was pretty much exclusively ran by the Progressive Conservatives. But even in their heyday, they didn't have the political success of winning three majorities back to back and doing it in such convincing fashion in the way that Doug Ford has. So Doug Ford is definitely going to go down in the history books as one of the most politically successful politicians in Canada. So certainly one of the more politically successful Ontario premiers. Whether you agree with or not with his policies, he is quite successful. But going into the numbers is really interesting because in the last election, the Ontario PCs in a legislature of 124 seats won 83 seats, a pretty dominant performance. And Doug Ford called this election thinking he was going to gain more seats. He had the goal of winning all the seats in the legislature and being premier forever. Make that however you want to make that. But the PCs, they gain in vote share from about 40% to 43%, and their seat count actually went down from 83 to it's going to be about 80 or 81 after all the votes are completely tallied. The New Democrats, they lost about 5 to 6%. They reached an 18.6% margin, and they won 27 seats, while the Liberals, they got to nearly 30%, 29.9%, and they only won 14 seats, about half of what the New Democrats won. So some pretty interesting political dynamics that are playing out in Toronto. One, that the NDP's vote share in the seats that they do win is becoming more concentrated. They're becoming more popular in the ridings that they do win and less popular in the ridings that they just don't win. And the Liberals, they have increased their popularity generally, but they've increased their popularity in ridings in which the PCs are already popular and are already the most popular party. So a lot of ridings are won by like 47 to 44 PC Liberal, and the NDP get like 5%. So this might show that the PCs are going to have a convincing 4 years, and in 2029 the opposition party is going to have a hard time winning. But this puts the Liberals in a position to where if the PCs decline in support and popularity, and the Liberals increase in support or popularity, the Liberals are in a prime position to take a lot of the PC's seats and actually put themselves in position to leapfrog the NDP, who are only popular in certain pockets of Ontario. But some very interesting results. We saw that Sarah Jama, the MPP in Hamilton Centre, who was kicked out of the NDP for being too radical. She was too pro-Hamas. She's too ardent on, a lot of Jewish civilians unfortunately being massacred on October 7th. And she lost her seat. She came fourth place in her riding, winning only a few thousand votes. So I think that a lot of Ontarians, especially myself, are happy about that. But overall, not a lot of change from yesterday to today. It looks like the legislature is going to look very similar to what it looked like just a few months ago.
Now, before I jump to you, Isaac, we actually have a map of the election results. And if you just look at the map, you can see the distribution. With Northern Ontario, it's pretty much gone to the NDP. You do see some orange down in the GTA and Southern Ontario, but it looks like Doug Ford has a pretty good hold on the places, on the ridings that matter. And you mentioned it was such a slight shift in the number of seats for the progressive conservatives. It wasn't, he was building it up to be this major sweep, but I don't think that really happened. So, Isaac, I just wanted to ask you, how did Doug Ford frame this election in the first place when he called it? To me, this thing just kind of went by so quickly. It seemed like it happened overnight. What was his reasoning behind it, and how did he frame it to voters?
Yeah, well, we'll remember that Doug Ford said he wanted this election because he needed the mandate to deal with the Trump tariffs, essentially. And now we're seeing the threat of Trump tariffs change on a daily basis. So maybe Ford felt that it needed to be expedited in some fashion, because for all we know, the tariff threat could disappear tomorrow. But one thing we didn't mention, of course, was the Ontario Liberal Party leader, Bonnie Crombie, losing her seat, which reminds me sort of the situation we've seen in Alberta over the last few months, wherein NDP leader Naheed Nenshi kept smack talking the government, essentially, and they were saying this was a different scenario because he didn't lose his seat. He was, of course, he just hadn't won a seat yet after he became party leader. But they were saying, so you're not in the parliament, Nenshi. How can you say anything? Run a by-election, get a seat, because you have no power, essentially, to tell us what to do. And I'm curious because Crombie has said that she's going to stay on as party leader despite not having a seat in the parliament, which really, I think, weakens the party's presence and her power as not only a leader, but as a leader. So I don't know. What do you guys think about that? How precedented is it for a leader to not win their riding, not have a seat in the legislature, but stay on as the party leader?
Well, let's just throw to the clip of Crombie right now in her speech accepting her electoral defeat and what she had to say to her Liberal Party supporters that evening.
Celebrate all our new MPPs that we're going to bring back, and let's celebrate coming back to party status. Ontario, I'm here. I am with you. And I commit to you today that I will stay on. I'll tell you again. Okay. I commit to you that I'll stay on as Ontario Liberal leader so that I can keep fighting for you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Let's enjoy the night.
That was the big.
So clearly an emotional moment. She does try to claim some sort of victory, bringing the party back from unofficial status to slightly above the required number of seats to have official party status. And there seems to be a trend with provincial leaders kind of sticking it out after defeating, or at least initially declaring. Back in your court, Isaac, if you recall, Rachel Notley wanted to stick around initially after her electoral defeat. Here in British Columbia, we saw this happen with the Green Party. The Sonia Furstenau, the Greens leader, she lost her own seat in Victoria and stayed on as leader and remains leader to this day. So what do we make of Bonnie Crombie's attempt here? Will she actually stick by her word to remain as party leader, losing her own seat in Mississauga, a place where she used to be the mayor of that area? And it makes me wonder, right? Like, how many alternatives do the Liberals really have?
Yeah, I would say that it'll be interesting to see because there's a few things playing for and against Crombie. For one, she increased the Liberals' popular vote share by 6%. That is not nothing. And she can make the argument that, she was put into a snap election just, a year after she became leader. She didn't have enough time to introduce herself to the Ontario public. She brought the party from not having official party status to having official party status, and she could, get some one of the MPPs to resign and win a by-election. However, I would say that a lot of some of the 14 MPPs might be saying, "Hey, I'm actually in the legislature. I might do a better job as the OLP leader than Bonnie Crombie." And for someone to not win their seat is definitely damaging, especially when they were the mayor of Mississauga and you can't win a seat in Mississauga. It looks like she ran in the wrong riding. She ran in Mississauga East Cooksville that the Liberals lost by 3.4%. And the Liberals lost Mississauga Erin Mills by 20 votes, which is 0.1%. So if she won, she ran in Erin Mills, she could have gotten a leader bump that many leaders see and won that riding, but she didn't. But I think that Crombie is going to have to fight to retain the leadership, but she definitely can. And you see that left wing parties are a little bit more loyal to their leaders. You see this especially with the NDP, where Jagmeet Singh and Rachel Notley get multiple kicks at the can to run, whereas conservative leaders, you could be the premier and get deposed. So it really will. It really remains to be seen what will happen with Crombie, but I expect her to have some success in maintaining her position as leader.
Yeah,
Just
Crombie
bringing
should have
this.
taken. Sorry, I'll just say something quick, Cosmin. I think Crombie should have taken some advice or some advice from Nenshi, because obviously he's the former Calgary mayor, and some would argue he's not very well liked there, so he is not running in Calgary. He's instead running in Rachel Notley's former seat, an NDP stronghold in Edmonton, where it's almost a guarantee that he literally can't lose. So I mean, Crombie could have done something similar
Yeah.
because, as we mentioned, I mean, losing a riding. She's talking about. I just found her speech there ironic. She's talking about fighting for the party. It's like, you're not in the legislature. You literally can't do what you're saying.
Now, just to bring this back to Doug Ford and his future as Premier of Ontario, obviously the big issue on the table is the incoming tariffs, which are scheduled to happen next week, if we are to take what Trump is currently saying to heart. And Doug Ford, there's been talk about him potentially being unleashed in a sense in this third consecutive majority government. Will Doug Ford shy away from some of his reluctance to address things like some of the culture wars stuff, some of the education issues? Because when I used to live in Ontario, that was what he ran on. He ran on reforming the sex ed curriculum, an issue he eventually dropped, and he made some changes, but not the changes he initially promised to the people who got him elected. Will this new majority mandate, he talks about the mandate a lot, will this unleash Doug Ford, so to speak, make him more willing to take further steps, in more conservative steps, let's just say, because he's played a very centrist role for a while?
Well, a lot of the conservatives I know in Ontario, they're definitely hoping for that. Doug Ford I find very fascinating because one day he'll get up on the microphone and off the cuff say like, "Oh, in safe injection sites are awful," or he would denounce wokeness in a speech, or he would say something about like left wing extremism or whatever, but he only says that every now and then, and it's not reflected in his governmental policy. You see the Ministry of Education becoming, a cesspool of woke. You see, the Ministry of Finance not doing anything to, clamp down on the excessive spending that the Ontario government has made routine. So I think that a lot of it's not just social conservatives, but fiscal conservatives want to see Doug Ford clamp down on this. And there are some indications that he might. In his victory speech, he said that he would be shutting down safe injection sites, which is a big win for Ontario. That would put Ontario in the same camp as Alberta in rejecting the progressive approach to getting people off of drugs. And he might actually make some moves on the education file since Stephen Lecce is no longer the Minister of Education. We now have Jill Dunlop as the Minister of Education, who, quite frankly, I'm not very excited about. But there could be an attempt to push on the things that he felt he didn't have the political capital to push on. Even if he did have the political capital and he just didn't decide to use it, he might feel that he now has that opportunity in a third mandate where he's been the premier for a very long time, and maybe he feels that he's earned the trust of Ontarians to push on something like this. But we'll see, because Doug Ford is notorious for flip flopping, like he flip flop on the green belt and flip flop on housing policy. It's his thing.
Now, to be premier during these tariffs, to me, is a sort of unenviable position to be in, because we could see the Canadian economy enter into a recession. Most likely it will, because of the damage that's done. He's going to have to spend a ridiculous amount of money. He's promised pandemic style measures. I don't know how popular that will be for the average voter when they see the price tag and the way that that's managed and administered to businesses. There was all the abuses going on with CERB and etc. So it is a quite unpredictable situation, and it could, depending on how he handles the economy and the Ontario economy, an economy that relies a lot on manufacturing, the auto sector, major areas that US President Donald Trump has pledged to specifically target. Those are the things he wants to reshore in the US market. He wants to build cars in the United States. He wants to manufacture steel in the United States. All of these things are integral to the Ontario economy. And should it not go the way that Doug Ford is hoping, could this be the end of his legacy in a sense? Could he be ending on a bad note? Because we've seen premiers on the East Coast in the Atlantic provinces completely back out. And I think part of the reasoning behind that is because they're looking at the next few years under Donald Trump and what it might do to their provinces, and they simply don't want anything to do with it.
Yeah, I would think that the Ford legacy definitely has the potential to be tarnished. He's not a beloved figure to begin with in Ontario. Like I'd say the median Ontarian has like a neutral opinion on Ford. He does some good things, he does some bad things. I talk to my parents and I consider them to be the median voter, and they're kind of like lukewarm to slightly warm on Doug Ford, depending on the day. So that's just who Doug Ford is. He has that folksy charm, but that sort of what makes him popular could work against them. And you've seen this with Trudeau. What made Trudeau initially very popular is his progressiveness and the sort of aloof approach to politics. But that really grated on people once he was in office for 9 years and disaster ran amok. You similarly saw this with Stephen Harper. He was a boring, calm, cooled, and calculated guy, and a lot of people were appealed by that in 2006, 2008, 2011. But by 2015, people got sick of it. So that could definitely happen with premiers. But I think Doug Ford will always live in the minds of some Ontarians as a good premier because of just his disposition. They think of Doug Ford as someone who is broadly competent. And also, a lot of people admire his role in the COVID-19 pandemic. I did not. I thought the way Ontario managed the pandemic was awful, but a lot of Ontarians disagree with me. And that is just how, people are going to remember Ford as a competent manager of the Ontario government, even if that is a dubious assertion.
Well, thanks, Noah, for the Ontarian's perspective. Just to move this, we saw this week in the nation was shocked to discover there were two stabbings involving children from essentially one side of the country to another. One of these stabbings happened in Alberta, Grand Prairie, and the other stabbing happened in Halifax. But yeah, so the Grand Prairie stabbing, this is a developing story, and there's been some troubling twists and turns because initially the suspect involved, is believed to know the children. There was some sort of incident, whether it was a mental health crisis. It's very unclear, but he ended up slashing these two children and including the esophagus of one child. Luckily, these children were treated. They are currently in the hospital. One of them was released, but one is still in the hospital being treated for their wounds. They are expected to make it out okay. But after this happened, this individual was released from custody, allowed to go back home by the RCMP, and charges were only pressed later this week. How could this happen when we have somebody committing crimes against children, potentially endangering the lives of children, and they're only pressing aggravated assault charges several days later when the evidence is so clear that there was wrongdoing involved?
Yeah, this really just comes down to the catch and release bail policy we've covered so much at True North, Cosmin. I mean, there's literally countless organizations, police organizations, unions, governments saying there is nothing we can do. These people just get released on bail the same day they commit the crime, and we've seen Poilievre talk about it. He's saying, I don't have the data, but it's like such a small percentage of individuals are committing the vast majority of the crimes because they're committing crimes over and over and over and over again. Like we covered that one Hungarian man at True North. What did he have? Like 400 charges. I mean, these people, you're just committing crimes on an almost daily basis, which sounds ridiculous, but literally you commit the crime, you get locked up, I guess, for a day, and then you're released on the very next day, and you're going to go commit more crimes, which obviously isn't good for the safety of Canadian citizens, but nor is it good for the offenders, because we know that going to jail, you have a chance to rehabilitate your life, to become someone, and maybe not be a criminal in the future. Whereas this, what is it called? Yes, revolving door. This recycling of criminals. I mean, I don't revolving door justice. I don't understand how that's good for anybody at all.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I will just
Yeah, I
point
would.
out, Isaac, before we carry on, that this individual was not let out on bail. The bail issue is a huge problem. There are so many repeat offenders who were let out on bail, but they did have a prior incident. Now, it's not clear what the prior incident was. There was talk in the media about the family seeking, I think it was called a Form 10, which is a sort of mental health intervention in this individual's case. But to me, this looks like a failure on the policing side just as much as the government justice system side, because the police, the RCMP, who were the first to respond to this incident, I'm assuming they entered the building or the residence this took place and saw that there were injured children, and this individual involved, the only person there, presumably the main suspect, and they decided to release him. So, how much can we truly blame government policies? Because in this particular instance, it is beyond government policies as well, but also the police seems to have forgotten what its duty is, and that is to protect the public. They declare that this person is not a threat to the public. Well, how do you know that this couldn't happen again if it is a lapse of mental health in a particular moment? They could have another break. It's unpredictable. That is the nature of mental health crises. We can't predict them. And when they do happen, the consequences can be dire.
Yeah, I think this story really points to a fundamental rot in the justice system. One of the key purposes of even having a government is to protect the people. It's to protect the domestic population, and specifically to protect the most vulnerable, the women and children, and those who are disabled. The fact that we as Canadians have not been able to construct a justice system in which the people who do the most sickening crimes to children are locked away and kept away from society, who are not and are unable to pose a threat to society. The fact they're unable to do that, and we are instead over prosecuting people like Tamara Lich and protesters for supposed extremism, which are really just matters of free speech in a lot of cases, or just even minor property crimes. These people are getting the book thrown at them, not the people who are stabbing children. And that is absolutely sick. It looks as if this person had to be released because the police were not able to press charges quickly enough. The principle of habeas corpus is very important. The idea that you're not able to be unlawfully detained. However, there is clear reason for detainment, and you have to press charges immediately in order to keep the public safe. The fact that the RCMP were not able to collect evidence enough so this person had to presumably be released for that reason, it's absolutely abhorrent, and it is a dereliction of the RCMP's duty. And this has become a trend. We have been seeing this all over the country, where people who have been accused of, killing people or putting people or trying to kill people are being released on a constant basis. People who are committing property crimes, people who are just the lowest of the low in society, which society does produce these people every now and then because we live in a country with millions of people. The fact that we're not able to deal with these people adequately shows a fundamental problem with the system. It's a problem that governments have created, and it's also a problem that the courts have created, because the Supreme Court, they love to strike down mandatory minimum laws. They love to expand the definition of cruel and unusual punishment. They love to expand the definition of Section 7's guarantee to life, liberty, and not the pursuit of happiness, but our version. Well, I forget the third part. But the point is that the courts, governments have worked together to produce the state that we are living in Canada, which is a state in which violent criminals are excused, and those who are political criminals, they get the book thrown at them. It is not an appropriate state of affairs, and this is something that I think Canadians have not been urging and pressing our public officials to take steps to correct. And it is something that needs to be changed, because if children are not being able to be protected, if children are being stabbed, it just shows a fundamental rot and corruption in our justice system.
It's very troubling indeed. It almost feels like Canadians are left to fend for themselves. It's not uncommon these days to be out on the streets, harassed, verbally assaulted, and even threatened in major cities. It happened to me the other day. You have people, you just walk out of the grocery store and there's somebody yelling at you, having a meltdown for no apparent reason other than you being the first person they see. It's outrageous that this is being allowed to happen, and it's very unfortunate, extremely sad that children are being caught up in this. And when we look at Halifax, which happened just earlier this week, I think it happened on Monday, if not over the weekend, a child with his family, I believe he was a 9-year-old boy, as somewhere around that age, perhaps 6 or 9 years old. Just a little boy was randomly assaulted by an individual with a knife. And this assault was so bad that it was a life-threatening situation. Now, as far as I know, thankfully, by the grace of God, this child is still alive, and I hope he is on the mend. And from what the police are saying, this family was just waiting at a bus stop, an average afternoon or morning, going about their day, and somebody lunged at this vulnerable child with a knife. And the public learns later that they were involved in a prior incident. And there's also reports that the family was notifying authorities, mental health authorities, about this individual because they had a history of mental health incidents, and they were worried that something like this would happen. The worst possible case scenario ends up happening. 9 times out of 10, this is what happens when somebody is left untreated. They have violent tendencies, and they're left out in the public to engage in whatever behavior they want. How If this doesn't wake up people to demand change, one near death experience for a child and another assault, potentially maiming these two other children for the rest of their lives. What is it going to take for Canadians to wake up and demand an end? It's easy to put people behind bars when we know them to be a threat to public safety, and it just takes the political will to do it. What is it going to take, Noah or Isaac?
I hope it doesn't take a disaster. But a lot of the time, people need to be punched in the face to realize that there is an actual problem. I am not hoping for a disaster, not at all. But I think that a lot of people, they're not resonating with this because they feel as if, oh, this is not going to happen to me or whatever. But I think as crime affects more and more people hear stories of, oh, my car was stolen, or I was harassed by someone who was on drugs. Then people are going to start to wake up to this. But this takes strong will from our political leaders, especially will to stand up to our courts, because when criminals are brought before judges are issuing Gladue reports to say indigenous offenders, and allowing them to go off with reduced sentences. Now the federal government, they want to expand the use of something called impact of race and culture assessments, which basically says that, hey, if you're black and you committed a crime, we have to take into consideration, the systemic racism that you dealt with all your life, and blah 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 blah, and they issue you a reduced sentence, or not, or just no penalty at all. So the direction that the government is going has to change, and that requires a significant public reaction to what is going on. We haven't seen this significant public reaction as crime has increased 50% since 2014. But I think that, as a federal election comes closer, people are going to start thinking about these things a bit more. And I think that the Canadian people have the opportunity to choose.
Isaac, any parallels to the Grand Prairie case, and what are your thoughts on the Alberta government's approach to addiction, mental health, and also public safety?
Yeah, a few things here. Just tying it back to bail, because we talked about that a crisis might need to occur, because that's what we saw happen with the bail reform system when all the provinces reached out to the feds. This was following a murder from someone who was out on bail. Obviously, children being stabbed is crisis enough to me. Of course, it could have been worse in the sense that they're still alive, but it will, I guess, really probably take something like that, as sad as it is, because I mean, I always tell people, you think it's not that bad, go walk through downtown. I don't care where you live, go walk through downtown. Like, get out of your house and go walk through downtown and tell me it isn't that bad. Really, I don't care where you live, it is. You just need to walk outside and realize the truth is right in front of you. It's not like this is some crazy opinion. I mean, just you can see it in 2 seconds if you just go walk through downtown how bad it is. As for the Alberta government's approach, obviously they've been leading the charge, I want to say, on the recovery aspect, on the war on drugs. We've obviously seen the opposite approach in BC, where you live, Cosmin, but I really do think Alberta's been leading the charge, and some provinces are starting to follow suit in importantly realizing that safe supply is not helping anyone. In fact, it's adding fuel to the flames, and that a recovery-based model is likely better. I don't know that it's the best possible option, but because there are so many variables, but certainly safe supply is the worst.
Yeah, we discussed the political future and that being a determinant of how this country ends up dealing with the public safety crisis and how a future government will handle the situation, whether there will be justice reform. And speaking of political future, we saw the English language debate with the major contenders for the Liberal Party of Canada, the Federal Liberals. And Mark Carney, the front runner, had several gaffes, and we could see potentially the first break in his resurgent, in the Liberals' resurgent popularity should he become leader. He made two mistakes that have been really called out. He said some questionable things about his own past and his own historical dealings. The first one, and the one that the Conservatives really latched onto, was his claim that he was not involved in Brookfield, that investment company he was a part of, in the decision to move the headquarters and move the company to New York from Canada. Obviously, it would look bad if he was in charge of moving a company to the United States during a time when the Liberals are loudly proclaiming themselves to be part of Team Canada. But it is true. He was on the board. He was involved. He was still a member when Brookfield made the decision to move the company. Let's throw up a video of this. We have Michael Barrett, Conservative MP, discussing this claim, and he made it openly to a question during the debate hosted by CBC.
Good morning. We're here today because Mark Carney needs to come out of hiding and answer questions for the lies that he's told to Canadians. I want to start by reading you a quote from the Toronto Star. It says, and I quote, "The Star asked the Carney campaign repeatedly if he supported the moving the headquarters to New York, but did not receive a response," end quote. Now, this wasn't a question from Conservatives. This came from the Toronto Star. And the answer is yes, by the way. Yes, he supported the moving of the Canadian headquarters of Brookfield to New York City, to Donald Trump's hometown. The real question for sneaky Mark Carney is if he thinks that this was such a good idea and such a good business decision for Brookfield, does he think that all Canadian companies should move their headquarters from Canada to New York City? This isn't something that can be dismissed as confusion or mindfulness or forgetfulness or something that happened a long time ago. This was mere months ago. And the facts are in black and white. I have another quote for you from Mark Carney. Quote, "The decision, the formal decision of the board happened after I ceased to be on the board," end quote. But here are the facts. In October, Mark Carney sat at the head of the board table for Brookfield Asset Management with one hand on the mahogany table, the other hand on the gavel, brought the meeting to order, received a motion to move the Canadian headquarters to New York City out of Canada, taking Canadian jobs with the move, and along with his board, they unanimously voted for that motion. Mark Carney gavelled out the meeting. But that's not all, because 6 days after US President Donald Trump first threatened Canada with unjustified tariffs, Mark Carney personally authored and sent a letter to all of the shareholders advising them of this unanimous decision that his board had taken, the board that he was chairing had taken, to move Canadian jobs to the United States?
So the inconsistencies are glaring. They're very obvious. He's saying one thing during the debate to make himself look good, but the facts are against him. And it's been several days. Mark Carney has not addressed this. How will this hold up? If he doesn't address this issue, the inconsistency in what he said and why he said it during the debate, will this be a weak point, a potential attack point for when Mark Carney has to square off against Pierre Poilievre in a federal leaders debate?
Yeah, Cosmin, I just want to say, for those who don't know, of course, the French debate was the day before the English debate, and Carney did terribly in both debates. For example, in the French debate, he said that he agreed with Hamas. Now, we know that we know that Carney's French is quite abysmal. So that is a whole other story on its own, because obviously Poilievre has a mastery of the language, and the way that Quebec votes has such a significant impact on what happens in the federal election. To be weak at French, I think, is just puts you in an untenable position as a federal candidate. I don't think you can win the federal election, certainly not easily, if you don't have mastery of the French language, and Carney clearly does not. But now we're seeing in the English debates too that he is just lying, easily provable that was just a lie. It's not true by any definition of the word truth. But I still think that, as you mentioned, Carney is the front runner for the Liberal leadership race, and I do think he's a shoo, and I certainly think he'll win. So I don't know that it'll affect him much in that, because the Liberals, as we've seen, haven't focused so much on issues concerning the country. They've more so focused on Poilievre and Trump and how they're going to deal with that. But when it comes to the federal debate stage against Poilievre, I mean, I imagine he's just in the back room writing a list, loading up his cannon with ammunition for things that he's going to use against Carney. You lied about this. You lied about this. You said this. You said this. In your debates, I mean, I have so many points against you now, Poilievre would, that he's really just giving him ammunition.
The inconsistencies are really adding up. You mentioned the French debate, but also what he said to a French audience versus an English audience. If we recall, while speaking to an English Anglophone audience, he said he would support pipelines. He would support an east to west pipeline. And then while speaking to a Francophone audience, he said the exact opposite. How can he expect to continue carry on forward? And I think part of this has to do with his inexperience as a politician, because as a public servant, you're not necessarily held to account on every single detail of what you say. And for somebody who's coasted through life, perhaps having a, weak relationship with telling the truth all the time, you could boast in certain business scenarios and bluff your way to certain decisions and make certain statements for your own gain. That doesn't fly at the political level, because everybody's watching. The audience is the entirety of Canada, but yet we see him doing pretty well in some polls. He's brought back the Liberals back from the dead to some degree. And is this a reason or a cause for concern for the Conservatives moving forward, Noah?
I think the polls are concerning, just from just the shock value of it, because we for a year and a half got very comfortable with the Conservatives being in the lead. I'm pretty sure conservative strategists, once they saw the Liberals go from 20% support to over 35, I think an Ipsos poll measured the Liberals support at 38%, the Conservatives at 36. The only firm that really shows the Conservatives still having a decently sized lead is Abacus. So take that for what you will. But it seems as if the Conservatives are going to adapt to this message, and it remains to be seen just how adaptable the Poilievre team is. If they can successfully adapt their anti-carbon tax message to a pro-Canada, not anti-Donald Trump, but not too anti-Donald Trump, but really anti-Carney, anti-Trudeau message. He has to balance a lot of different things. And I think it makes it a lot more complicated for Polyev, but it makes it less complicated when you have easy things to attack Mark Carney on. The fact that Mark Carney helped to move Brookfield's headquarters to New York. The fact that Mark Carney lived outside of Canada for a good chunk of his adult life. I think it would be pretty interesting to see just how long Mark Carney has spent outside of Canada in his adult life and how that compares to how long he's spent in Canada. I think that Polyev is also going to have a good time, associating him with Trudeau because Carney was an economic advisor. Plus, Polyev is a lot more competent in French, and Carney's lack of French could, cause Quebec voters to, go away from Carney. Now, I think it's interesting that polls show that Carney is doing very well in Quebec, a lot better than, say, Polyev or Freeland or any other Liberal contestants, and better than Trudeau even. And that's quite interesting, but I think Quebec voters more often than not pay attention to their provincial politics primarily and then federal politics. So once they get acclimated to paying attention to federal politics in a general election and they see Mark Carney, at the French debate stage struggling and saying, Je suis d'accord avec Hamas, I think that Quebec voters are going to change their mind, switch their votes back to Yves-François Blanchet and to Pierre Poilievre. So there's a lot of holes in the Mark Carney campaign that the Conservatives can exploit. It just remains to be seen whether or not they are adaptable enough and they are capable of making that pivot.
This willingness to embellish and even stretch the truth, make things up, as a matter of fact, seems to be becoming a habit for him. And going back to the debate itself, he also made another claim. He claimed that he helped Paul Martin balance the budget. Now, people have pointed out that at that time, when Paul Martin reported a balanced budget, Mark Carney was working for Goldman Sachs, the famous investing company in the United States. So let's throw to that clip because it's just another instance where Mark Carney says things that don't really line up with reality.
It was my privilege to work with Paul Martin when he balanced the books and kept the books balanced. And one of the lessons of that is the need for government to continue to focus on how effectively it is spending precious taxpayers' dollars. In other words, a focus on the outcomes of programs as opposed to the dollars going in. And one thing you can see is that the scale of increase in spending and the scale of increase in the public service hasn't been matched by greater productivity.
So here's another obvious case where I just don't know if Mark Carney doesn't think people have access to the internet. People are not capable of researching things for themselves or putting two and two together. Here he says something that is proven false. Very easy to find out what he was doing at that time. He's got a record as a public figure. He's got a Wikipedia page, for crying out loud. People know what Mark Carney has been up to. So what is he trying to sell here? Is it just a matter of presenting himself as this guy who has experience balancing the books? Why not just stick to your past as an economist and, governors of the global banks like the Bank of England and the Bank of Canada? Why embellish and make things up to this extent?
Yeah, I guess being the governor of the Bank of Canada, Bank of England wasn't enough. He had to, Harper had to ask him to be finance minister, and he had to work with Paul Martin to balance the budget. I guess I think he said when Paul Martin was prime minister, but that would not be true. I don't think that was under Chrétien. But next he's gonna say that he helped Mulroney, introduce the HST, and he's gonna say he helped Pierre Elliott Trudeau, and maybe even he was around during the time of McDonald. Who knows? But it's interesting that Carney's reputation is being linked with being a liar. That we talked about the meme before the show was running, and the meme is funny, obviously, but it just goes to show that Mark Carney's reputation is being linked with lying, and memes are just demonstrative of how the public views a candidate. So I think that him lying so much is going to work against Mark Carney. There's going to be questions about his honesty, about working with Paul Martin, and about moving the headquarters to New York, Brookfield, and some of the other things that he claims. And even if he says some things that are true, because he has the reputation of a liar, people are not going to take him seriously. He's like the boy who cried wolf. So that will certainly add an interesting dynamic.
Isaac, why the silence from Mark Carney? Will he address this? Do you expect him to come out and say, well, I might have messed up the facts in the meantime, but take responsibility? Is that the type of man Mark Carney is?
Cosmin, if this were a one-off that we were talking about, I think that would be a possibility. But this is clearly a pattern we're seeing develop from Mark Carney, and I don't know why it is, but it may just be that he really thinks he can say whatever he wants and get away with it. I mean, these are clearly demonstrably false, what he's saying. And to be running to be the leader, of course, he'll be if he wins the leadership election of the Liberals, he will just become the prime minister. But assuming he does participate in the election following that, to be running to be the leader of a country and your reputation is known as a liar, I mean, it can't be a good look. I don't know why anyone would take that route willingly. People already have I would say, natural distrust of politicians. So if you're on top of that, known as just a blatant liar, a continuous liar, it can't be good for you.
And I will add another observation. For a while, the legacy media, I guess throughout this whole thing, the legacy media has been so soft on Mark Carney. They've never asked him a single hard question. But I have noticed with this particular instance, there is a little bit of a shift. And we have to understand in the bigger picture, the media's future, the legacy media, particularly the CBCs, is intertwined with the future Liberal candidate, because it is the Liberal government that has introduced all of these measures, has funded the media with up to $600 million in subsidies, has boosted CBC's budget time and time again, and is now even proposing a further boost to CBC's budget, despite the declining popularity and the distaste people have with our public broadcaster. But they are taking notice. And if this weakness proves to be Mark Carney's undoing, in some ways, this will be the undoing of the Liberal media establishment, which so heavily relies on the Liberal government, should Pierre Poilievre become prime minister and move forward with some of his pledges concerning the CBC, etc. So moving on from here, I think we're going to wrap it up, but it's definitely been a busy last week. And we've also had such a little bit of a gap here because there's some organizational changes and some exciting things happening here with us and at True North and Juno News. So as a final remark, I'm just going to wrap it up and say everything you heard here was off the record. All right. Well, how was my hosting for the first time?
Pretty good, Cosmin. I think the audience will be very pleased with everything you did today.
Yeah, I hope so. It was a little bit of a gap. How many weeks has it been since we last did this? Like
maybe like 2 weeks? A month or so, or yeah, maybe 2 weeks. Yeah. I haven't done it in a while because I have classes on awkward time on Thursday and just can't get out there. But it's definitely fun to always do OTR.